100. That is a number we reach for when we want to say complete. 100%, and we mean the whole of a thing, nothing held back, nothing left out. 100 years, and we call it a full human life, a century, a span so complete that we mark it with celebration. When a measure is full and running over, when nothing more could possibly be added, we say it is 100. And so there is something almost unbearable, something that ought to stop us in our tracks, in the realization that the man from Nazareth, in the span of roughly 3 years of public speaking, 3 years in a working life, in a backwater province of a forgotten corner of the Roman Empire, left behind at least 100 distinct things, 100 commands, 100 promises, 100 warnings and invitations and declarations about himself and about you and about the God he called Father, and about the kind of life that is actually worth living. 100 things, each one of them spoken for a reason, each one of them precise, each one of them still standing 2,000 years later exactly where he set it down, unmoved, unweathered, unexhausted by all the centuries of scholarship and argument and preaching that have crashed against them like waves against a rock that does not move. 100 things, a full and complete set of words for a full and complete human life. And here is the strange and quiet tragedy that this entire teaching is going to sit inside of, gently and honestly, for as long as we are together today. Most of us live as though he never said any of them. Not because we reject them. That would almost be more honest. That would at least be a decision, a position, a stance you could argue with. No, we do something stranger than rejection, something harder to see precisely because it hides in plain sight. We affirm them and ignore them at the same time. We would defend these words if someone attacked them. We would grieve if they were taken away from us. We keep them in the house like heirlooms in a locked glass cabinet, dusted and admired and pointed out to visitors and never ever actually used while we live our real daily lives. The anxious mornings, the resentful afternoons, the sleepless nights, the quiet compromises we make with ourselves in the dark, as though the one who spoke them had never opened his mouth at all. He said, "Do not worry," and we worry. We worry with a thoroughness and a persistence that would astonish our ancestors. He said, "Forgive," and we keep the ledger, we tend the grievance, we rehearse the offense until it is worn smooth from handling. He said, "Do not be afraid." And in one form or another, that instruction appears in the scriptures more than 365 times, once for every day of the year and one to spare. And fear is still the low background hum of the modern soul, the thing beneath the thing, the engine idling under everything we do. He said the last would be first, and the first would be last, and we still arrange our entire lives, our careers, our comparisons, our secret scorekeeping around the desperate project of being first. He said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And we stay exhausted, and we call the exhaustion responsibility, and we wear it like a badge, like proof that we matter, like evidence that we are carrying something important. He offered us rest, and we chose the yoke. He offered us his words, and we chose to admire them from a distance where they could not touch us. 100 things spoken for a reason. And the reason was never to decorate a religion. The reason was never to give theologians something to argue about across the centuries, though heaven knows they have. The reason was never merely to fill the red letters in a certain kind of Bible so that the words of Jesus could be found more quickly on the page. The reason was you. The reason was the specific, particular, actual life you are living right now, in the room where you are sitting at the hour this found you, with the exact weight you carried into this moment. The thing you are worried about, the person you have not forgiven, the fear you have not named, the grief that has not lifted, the exhaustion that sleep does not cure. Every one of these 100 things was aimed with a precision that ought to frighten us and comfort us in equal measure, at some exact place in the human heart where healing was needed and had not yet come. He did not speak in general. He never once spoke in general. This is one of the most astonishing things about him, and we miss it constantly. He spoke to the fisherman with the loud mouth and the fragile courage, the one who would swear undying loyalty and then deny he ever knew the man 3 times before a rooster crowed. He spoke to the tax collector sitting at his booth, counting coins that everybody hated him for taking, a traitor to his own people, and he said 2 words, "Follow me," and the man got up and left the money on the table. He spoke to the woman who had been married 5 times and was living with a man who was not the 6th husband, and he spoke to her at noon, at the well, at the empty hour, when the respectable women of the town had already come and gone in the cool of the morning, and she had waited until the heat of the day to draw her water precisely so that she would not have to endure their eyes and their whispers. He met her there, in her carefully chosen isolation, and he told her everything she had ever done, and instead of shaming her, he offered her living water, and she ran back into the very town she had been avoiding to tell everyone she could find about the man who knew her completely and did not turn away. He spoke to each of them the one thing that each of them specifically needed to hear. And the astonishing claim of the Christian faith, the claim we are going to test and turn over and hold up to the light for the next several hours together, is that he is still doing it. That these 100 things were never locked to their original moment, never sealed inside their own century, never spoken only to the people whose sandals stirred the dust of first-century Galilee. That every one of them was spoken forward, down the long corridor of time, aimed past those first hearers and out through the centuries, to arrive in your ears today as freshly, as pointedly, as personally, as if the dust of that road were still settling on his feet and you were standing in the crowd close enough to see his face. So this is what we are going to do together, and I want you to know the shape of it before we begin, so you can settle in for the whole journey. We are going to walk through the things Jesus actually said. Not 100 of them recited one after another like a list to be endured and checked off, but gathered into the great rivers they flow into, the great themes he returned to again and again across his ministry. What he said about worry, about money, about forgiveness, about fear, about love, about death, about the kingdom of God, about prayer, about the poor and the humble and the last, and above all, about the person he himself claimed to be. We are going to gather his 100 sayings into these deep channels so that by the end you will not merely have heard his words, but will have felt the shape of the mind behind them, the heart behind them, the astonishing and consistent and unmistakable character of the one who spoke them. And as we walk, we are going to ask, honestly and without flinching, the question the title of this teaching puts squarely on the table. If he said these things for a reason, and he did, then why do so many of us, good people, sincere people, people who genuinely love him and would never dream of denying him, live as though he didn't? Why is the gap so wide between what we say we believe and how we actually live on an ordinary Tuesday? And more than that, this is the part that matters most. We are going to ask what it would look like, what it would actually feel like in the body and the bloodstream of a real and ordinary week, to begin living as though he did. Because that is the invitation underneath all 100 of them, not to admire him, to follow him, not to file his words away in the cabinet with the other heirlooms, to let them change the way you wake up tomorrow morning. That is the promise of the next few hours, and I want to make it plainly, right at the start, so you know exactly what you have sat down inside of. By the time we finish this journey together, you will have walked through the very heart of what Jesus taught: worry and money and forgiveness and fear and love and death and the kingdom and the staggering claims he made about his own identity. And you will have been given gently and without pressure and without shame, a way to stop merely believing these things and start actually inhabiting them, a way to close the gap, a way to move his words out of the locked cabinet and into the load-bearing foundation of your actual life. That is the whole of it. That is why we are here, you and I, at this hour, in this moment that I do not believe is an accident. Let us begin. Before we go one step further into his words, I want to pause for just a moment and speak to you directly. The actual person listening right now, in whatever room you are in, at whatever hour this teaching found you. Maybe it is early morning and the house is still quiet and you have stolen these minutes before the demands of the day begin. Maybe it is the middle of the night and you could not sleep and something led you here. Maybe you are driving or walking or sitting in a parked car in a lot somewhere, unable to go inside just yet. Wherever you are, however you got here, I am glad you are here. And if a place like this, where the words of Jesus are taken slowly and seriously and given room to do their actual work, unhurried, unrushed, without gimmicks. If this is something you want to be able to return to, then let me ask you one simple thing, and only this one thing. Subscribe to this channel. That is all. That is the whole request. It costs you nothing. It is completely free, a single tap of your thumb, and it is done. But here is what it does and why I am asking. Without it, this teaching ends and drifts away into the vast ocean of everything else. And the next one we make, and there will be a next one, and it may be the very one you needed most, the one built for the exact storm that is coming toward your life next month. That next teaching arrives without you, and you never even know it was there. Subscribing is simply the quiet act of keeping your seat at this table. It is you saying, in effect, I want to come back to this. I want to be here for the next one. Tap the subscribe button just below the video, and that is the whole of it. You will be here for what comes next, and I would be honored to have you. And while your thumb is near the screen, do one more small thing with me, and only this. Leave a single word in the comments for what you are carrying into this teaching today. Just one word. The weight you are quietly hoping to set down before we are through. Fear, grief, anger, exhaustion, shame. Whatever it is, one word. You do not have to explain it. You do not have to perform it or make it presentable. Just name it in one word and let it be seen. Because you will be surprised, genuinely surprised, at what it does to your own heart to see, scrolling past beneath your word, the words of hundreds of other people carrying the very same weight you thought you were carrying alone. You are not the only one who woke up heavy this morning. You never were. Now let us turn to the words themselves. Let us begin where he began. Because the very first recorded word of his entire public ministry is not the one most people would guess. And the fact that it surprises us, the fact that it lands on the modern ear as strange or harsh or old-fashioned, is itself the first and clearest sign of how far our imagined Jesus has drifted from the real one. The first thing he preached, according to the record, was this: repent. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. That was the opening note of the entire symphony, the first word struck when the long silence finally broke. Not relax. Not you are enough just as you are. Not here is a gentle, inspirational thought to brighten your difficult morning. He opened his mouth after 30 years of near-total silence, after 30 years of working wood with his hands in an obscure town that people joked nothing good could come out of, after his baptism in the Jordan and the voice that spoke from the opened heavens and the Spirit descending like a dove, after 40 days alone in the wilderness with nothing to eat, withstanding the most sophisticated and patient temptations the ancient adversary could devise. He opened his mouth after all of that, and the first word out of him was a call to turn around. We have to sit with this because the word has been badly damaged in transit across the centuries. When most people today hear the word repent, they do not hear what Jesus meant by it. They hear a red-faced man on a street corner holding a cardboard sign. They hear condemnation, judgment, the wagging finger, the threat. They hear, at bottom, you are bad, and you should feel bad about it. And so understandably they recoil, and they file the word away as belonging to a harsher and less enlightened kind of religion than the gentle, affirming spirituality they would prefer. But the word Jesus actually used, the Greek word that stands underneath the English one, the word the gospel writers reached for to capture what he said, is metanoia, and it means something far larger, far deeper, and far kinder than guilt. It is one of the great tragedies of translation that so rich a word arrives in our ears so thin. Metanoia. Let us take it apart, because the parts tell the story. Meta means after or beyond. It signals a movement, a transition, a passage from one place to another. And noia comes from nous, the Greek word for the mind, though not the mind in our narrow modern sense of the calculating intellect, but the mind as the whole seat of understanding and perception and judgment, the entire faculty by which a person sees reality and decides how to move through it. So metanoia is not a feeling. It is not the sensation of being sorry, though genuine sorrow certainly has its place in the landscape. Metanoia is the turning of the entire inner person. It is a change not of mood, but of direction. It is the whole self, mind and will and desire and orientation, pivoting from one way of facing to another. Picture it concretely, because Jesus always intended it to be concrete. Picture a traveler who has been walking north for a very long time, walking with total confidence, certain he is headed the right way, making good time, feeling the satisfaction of steady progress. And then he stops. He pulls out the map, and with a sudden cold jolt in the stomach, he realizes that north was wrong the entire time, that every confident mile he walked took him further from where he needed to be, not closer. And what does he do? He doesn't sit down in the road and weep about the wasted miles, though he might feel the sting of them. He does not spend the rest of his life flagellating himself for the error. He turns, he faces the other direction, and he begins walking south with exactly the same energy and confidence he had been wasting going the wrong way. That turn, that decisive, whole-bodied, life-reorienting turn, that is metanoia. That is repentance, as Jesus meant it. It is not primarily about feeling bad. It is about facing the right way at last. And notice, this is everything. Do not miss this. Notice the reason he gives for the turning. He does not say repent because you are wretched and worthless. He does not say repent because a terrible judgment is coming to crush you if you don't. He says, repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The reason is not threat. The reason is nearness. Something magnificent is arriving, is almost here, is close enough now to reach out and touch, and you simply cannot receive what is coming toward you while you are still facing the opposite direction. The call to turn is not a punishment handed down by an angry deity. It is the most hopeful sentence a person walking in the wrong direction could ever possibly hear. It means the road is not closed. It means the kingdom is still near, still arriving, still available. It means the turning is still possible. Today, right now, from wherever you happen to be standing, no matter how many confident miles you have already walked in the wrong direction. So here already, in the very first word of his ministry, we find the whole pattern of our problem laid out in miniature. We have taken a word that means turn toward the beautiful thing that is coming and shrunk it down into a word that means feel ashamed of yourself. And then, quite reasonably, we avoid it. Nobody wants to spend their life feeling ashamed. So we quietly set repentance aside as something meant for people worse than us, and in doing so, we set aside the doorway itself, the very door that opens onto everything else. He said it for a reason. The reason was to fling the door open, and most of us live as though the door were a wall. From that first word, he moved almost immediately to the next, and it was just as short and just as total. He walked along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, and let us be clear about what that place actually was, because our imaginations have softened it into something it was not. It was not a picturesque lake in a gentle painting. It was a working body of water, loud and pungent with the business of commercial fishing, thick with the smell of fish and salt and wet rope and drying nets, crowded with the shouts of men hauling their catch and mending their gear in the relentless heat. And there, in the middle of all that ordinary labor, he saw two brothers, Simon and Andrew, throwing their net into the water, doing the exact thing they had done every single working day of their lives, the thing their father had taught them and his father had taught him, the thing that was their identity and their income and their reputation and their entire imagined future stretching out ahead of them, one catch at a time until they grew old and taught it to their own sons. And Jesus looked at them and said two words that ended one life and began another. Follow me. Not consider my teaching, not attend my lectures when it happens to be convenient for your schedule. Not add me to the list of interesting influences that help shape your general worldview. Follow, come after me, walk the road I walk, go where I go, be present for what I am present for. Stay close enough to watch how I respond when I am tired and hungry and the crowds will not leave me alone. Stay close enough to see how I speak to the people everyone else has written off. Stay close enough to hear how I pray when no one is watching and there is nothing to be gained by it. Learn me not from a book, but from proximity. The way an apprentice learns a craft, the way a child learns to be human, by being near, by watching, by imitating, by staying close over long stretches of ordinary time. And the staggering thing in the text, the detail that ought to stop us every single time we read it, is that they left the nets immediately. Immediately. They did not schedule a follow-up conversation to discuss the terms. They did not go home first to weigh the pros and cons, to consult the family, to make sure the timing was right and the risk was manageable. They did not ask for a trial period or a written guarantee. Something in the voice, something in the man himself, was of such combined authority and tenderness that the most rooted men in the most rooted profession dropped the only life they had ever known, left the nets lying there on the shore, and walked into an unknown future behind a man they barely knew. The word the gospel uses carries a sense of immediacy and ongoing movement, a call issued in the moment by a person already in motion to people who were, at that very second, occupied with something else entirely. It was not an invitation to an event. It was a summons to a whole new way of being alive. And we have quietly, subtly, almost without noticing, made follow me into believe certain things about me. We have swapped the road for a set of correct opinions. We have somehow decided that we can hold all the right doctrines about Jesus in our heads, while our feet stay firmly and comfortably planted in exactly the life we were already living before we ever heard of him. And we have called that arrangement faith. But he did not say agree with me. He did not say affirm the following statements about my nature and my mission. He said follow me. And following is a thing the feet do. It has a direction. It has a cost. It leaves something behind on the shore. The nets, the booth, the old identity, the safe and familiar future you had already mapped out for yourself. He said it for a reason, and the reason was that he wanted our lives, not merely our opinions about him. And most of us, if we are honest, have handed him our opinions and quietly kept our lives. Now, having called these ordinary men, watch what he did with them next, because it tells you exactly what kind of teacher he intended to be and what kind of kingdom he was building. He did not take them to a school. He did not enroll them in a curriculum. He took them up onto an ordinary hillside, and he sat down in the grass, which was the posture of a rabbi, the settled, deliberate posture of someone preparing to say something that mattered. And he opened his mouth and delivered what we have called ever since the Sermon on the Mount. And he opened that sermon, the greatest sermon ever preached, with a series of statements so upside down, so completely contrary to everything the human heart naturally believes about who is winning at life and who is losing, that we have spent 2,000 years failing to take them literally. We call them the Beatitudes, from the Latin word for blessed, and they are among the most famous words he ever spoke and among the least believed. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Read that list again, slowly, and feel how completely it inverts the world you actually live in. Blessed, genuinely well off, genuinely fortunate, genuinely to be envied, flourishing at the deepest possible level, are the poor in spirit. The ones who have come to the very end of their own inner resources, who know with painful certainty that they cannot manufacture their own righteousness or fix their own souls, who stand before God with completely empty hands and nothing to offer. Blessed are those who mourn, the grieving, the ones whose faces are wet, the ones whose sorrow makes everyone around them uncomfortable, the ones the world hurries politely past because grief is awkward and inconvenient and slows things down. Blessed are the meek, not the aggressive, not the self-promoting, not the ones clawing and elbowing their way to the top of every heap, but the gentle, the ones who have laid down the sword of constant self-assertion, the ones who do not need to win every argument and dominate every room. He is describing in 8 short sentences a kingdom whose entire economy runs precisely backward from ours. In our world, the world of the marketplace and the ladder and the algorithm, blessing flows to the strong, the full, the confident, the winning, the ones with the most followers and the fullest accounts and the loudest voices. In his kingdom, blessing flows in exactly the opposite direction, to the poor, the mourning, the meek, the hungry, the merciful, the ones the world overlooks entirely. And he was not describing some distant heaven you might reach after you die if you are good enough. He was describing right there on that hillside, in the present tense, the actual living texture of life inside the kingdom that was already, in his own presence, breaking into the world like dawn breaking over a dark valley. Why does this matter so much for the way we actually live right now, today? Because almost all of our anxiety, almost all of our frantic striving, almost all of the bone-deep exhaustion so many of us carry, comes directly from believing the exact opposite of the Beatitudes. We believe deep in our bones, beneath all our religious language, that blessing flows to the full. And so we spend our whole lives frantically, desperately trying to be full of achievement, full of security, full of approval, full of accomplishments we can point to, full of the settled, permanent sense that we are finally enough, that we have finally done enough and become enough to be safe and to be loved. And Jesus, from the very foundation stone of his entire teaching, from the opening words of his greatest sermon, says, no, that is not where the door is. The door into the real life, the life that is actually life, is on the other side entirely. It opens for the ones who have stopped pretending to be full. It opens for the poor in spirit, for the ones honest enough to come with empty hands. He said it for a reason, and the reason was to free us from the treadmill we are killing ourselves on. And most of us are still running on that treadmill at full speed, having read the very words that told us we could step off. He kept going up on that hill, and every sentence turned another corner of the human heart inside out. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother is in danger of the judgment. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks with lust has already committed it in his heart. Over and over, the same startling structure. You have heard that it was said, but I say to you. He was taking the law that everyone already knew, the law they had built their whole religious identity on keeping, and he was driving it inward, down past the behavior into the desire, down past the visible action into the hidden intention, down into the secret interior room of the heart where no other teacher in history had ever dared to bring the law. And the effect of this is not, as it first appears, to crush us under an impossible and ever-expanding standard, though it can certainly feel that way in the first shock of hearing it. The effect is something far more surgical, far more merciful. He is showing us that the problem was never only in our hands, it was always, all along, in our hearts. External rule-keeping was never going to be enough, could never have been enough, because the sickness was always deeper than behavior. It lived in the source, not just the symptoms, and a physician who tells you the disease goes deeper than you thought is not being cruel to you. He is being the only kind of physician worth having, the kind who intends to actually heal you all the way down, root and all, rather than simply managing your symptoms and sending you home still sick. And then, right there in the middle of that same sermon, he taught them to pray, and he gave them the words that more human beings have spoken aloud than any other words in the entire history of the world. Our Father, which art in heaven. Stop at the very first two words, Our Father. In an age when the God of Israel was approached with trembling and elaborate ritual, when his holy name was considered too sacred to be spoken aloud at all, when the distance between the Almighty and ordinary people felt infinite and unbridgeable, Jesus opened the way to God with the word that a small child uses for the man who tucks him into bed at night. Father. Abba, in his own Aramaic tongue, an intimate, familial, tender word, closer to Papa than to any formal title. Not master, not judge, not distant cosmic force that set the universe spinning and then withdrew to a great and silent distance. Father, and not even my Father, as though access to God were a private possession to be hoarded and guarded, but our Father, drawing every single person who prays those words into one enormous family that spans every century and every continent and every language on earth. In two words, he redefined the entire relationship between humanity and God. He said that the God who holds the galaxies in the palm of his hand wants to be known by you, the way a good and loving father is known by a child who has never once, not for a single day of his life, doubted that he is loved. Do you feel how far that is from how most of us actually pray, on the rare and hurried occasions when we manage to pray at all? Most of us, if we are truly honest with ourselves, still approach God as a distant official whose approval we are anxiously trying to earn, submitting our requests and our good behavior like paperwork and hoping it is enough. Or we approach him as a kind of cosmic vending machine into which we insert the correct prayers and from which we expect the desired outcomes, and which we shake in frustration when it fails to dispense what we ordered. Or saddest of all, we approach him as a perpetually disappointed parent, already halfway to shaking his head at us, already sighing over our latest failure before we have even opened our mouths. And Jesus said, Father. He said it for a reason. The reason was to end our deep orphan loneliness, to tell us that the truest and deepest fact about the universe is not cold indifference, but a face, a father's face, that turns toward us with delight. And most of us live like orphans anyway, self-protective, anxious, perpetually striving to earn a place at a table where a seat has already been set, permanently, with our own name carved into it. He gave us more than the address of God in that prayer. He gave us the entire posture of it. Give us this day our daily bread. Daily. Not a warehouse of bread stockpiled for the year, not enough provision secured in advance to eliminate all future need and therefore all future dependence, but daily bread, enough for today, which means we are invited gently and insistently to come back again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. He was building into the very center of prayer a rhythm of ongoing, renewing trust, a relationship that begins fresh each morning rather than a single transaction that settles the account once and forever and frees us from ever needing him again. And our anxiety hates this. Our anxiety wants the warehouse. Our anxiety wants enough security stockpiled and sealed away that we will never again have to depend on anyone or anything, least of all a God we cannot see and cannot control. And Jesus, with quiet and deliberate insistence, teaches us to ask only for today's bread, because he knows something we keep forgetting. The warehouse would never actually give us the peace we imagine it would. It would only give us one more thing to guard, one more fortress to defend, one more anxious inventory to keep. The peace is not in the warehouse. The peace is in the Father who fills the hand each morning, and because he knew we would still hesitate to ask, knew that some old wound or some quiet shame had convinced us that God was reluctant, that we would have to wear him down, that the door of heaven was heavy and grudging and slow to open. He added one of the most reassuring promises he ever spoke, and he built it as a series of rising steps. Ask, he said, and it shall be given you, seek, and you shall find, knock, and it shall be opened unto you. For everyone that asks receives, and he that seeks finds, and to him that knocks it shall be opened. And then he pressed it home with an argument from the heart of every parent who has ever lived. What man is there among you, he asked, who, if his son asks him for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a serpent? If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more shall your Father, which is in heaven, give good things to them that ask him? Feel the weight of that, how much more. He is not saying God is a little more generous than a good human father. He is saying the distance between God's goodness and the best human goodness we know is so vast that if we, flawed, tired, impatient, imperfect as we are, still instinctively give good things to our children when they ask, then the perfect Father, whose goodness has no flaw and no limit and no bad day, is infinitely more ready to give good things to his. Prayer in the teaching of Jesus is not a mechanism for informing a distant God of things he does not already know, nor a system for bending his reluctant will toward our preferences, nor a spiritual transaction where a sufficient quantity of asking finally produces the desired output. It is a relationship, the posture of a child before a father, coming with open hands, asking for what they need, seeking what they cannot yet see, knocking at the door behind which the Father lives and waits. And the Father's answer, Jesus promises with total confidence, is always to give, to reveal, to open. Not always the thing we named, in the form we named it, on the timeline we demanded, but always good, always from the hand of a father who cannot give his children a stone. He said it for a reason, and the reason was to end forever the lie that God is reluctant. And most of us, if we are honest, still pray, on the rare occasions we pray at all, as though we were knocking on the door of a stranger who would rather not be disturbed, having heard the one who said knock, and it shall be opened, and never quite believing that the one on the other side of the door has been waiting all along for us to knock. And then, still in the same sermon, still sitting in the grass on that hillside, he said the thing that may well be the single most disobeyed instruction he ever gave, and he said it not once but repeatedly, circling back to it and around it and through it like a man who knew, with perfect foreknowledge, that we would need to hear it more than once, more than a dozen times, more than we could count. Do not worry. Do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap, nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. And yet I say to you that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Which of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to the span of his life? Here is a teaching aimed like an arrow, drawn back to the full and released straight at the exact center of the modern condition. Because we are, by almost every measure that can be taken, the most anxious people who have ever lived on the face of this earth. We have more security than any generation in the whole of human history and less peace than almost any of them. We have locks on our doors and insurance on our lives and savings in our accounts and screens in our pockets that promise to keep us informed, minute by minute, of every distant catastrophe unfolding anywhere on the planet. And we lie awake anyway, in the dark, running the same tired loops of fear that our ancestors ran by firelight. Only ours are louder and faster, and never stop. Anxiety has become so normal, so constant a feature of the interior landscape, that many of us have genuinely forgotten what it felt like to wake up in the morning without it already there, waiting for us at the threshold of consciousness before our eyes are even open. And into all of it, into the whole roaring machinery of modern dread, Jesus says quietly, "Look at the birds." Not because the birds are lazy. The birds are not lazy at all. The birds are up at first light, working hard, hunting for the worm, building the nest, feeding the young. He is not commending idleness. He is pointing at something far more precise. The birds work, but the birds do not carry tomorrow's provision as a crushing psychological weight today. They do the work that today requires, and they trust the world to hold them, and it does. Jesus is not forbidding planning. He is not calling us to irresponsibility or to some careless refusal to prepare. He is naming, with surgical precision, a specific and poisonous thing. The anxious rehearsal of futures that have not arrived and mostly never will. The endless mental carrying of loads that were never actually given to us to carry, because they belong to a day that is not yet here and may never come at all. And notice the logic that sits underneath the command, because this is what elevates it from a pleasant sentiment into something with the power to actually change your life. Your Heavenly Father feeds them. That is the ground of the whole thing. The reason we do not have to be consumed and hollowed out by anxiety is not that everything will always go the way we want it to. Jesus never once promises that, and he himself walked with open eyes straight toward a cross. The reason is that there is a Father, and the Father sees, and the Father is not absent, and the Father who takes the trouble to clothe a wild flower that blooms for a single afternoon and is gone by evening is not going to be careless or forgetful with the child he made in his own image and loves with an everlasting love. The cure for worry in the teaching of Jesus is not positive thinking. It is not the suppression of fear by sheer force of will. It is not a technique for emptying the mind. It is the relocation of trust. It is the deliberate, repeated act of moving the entire weight of your future off of your own shoulders, which were never built to bear it and are buckling under it even now, and onto the shoulders of a Father whose strength has no limit and whose attention never wavers, and whose love for you does not depend on your performance. He said it for a reason, and the reason was to give us rest, real rest, deep down in the place where the worry actually lives. And most of us, even those of us who could recite these very verses from memory, who have embroidered "do not worry" onto decorative pillows and painted, "consider the lilies" onto the walls of our homes. Most of us worry as though he never said a single word about it. And this is the beating heart of our whole subject today. It is not that we have not heard him. We have heard him. We have heard him 1,000 times. It is that hearing has never quite become trusting, and trusting has never quite become living, And so the words remain up there on the wall, framed and admired and beautiful, and utterly, completely disconnected from the 3 o'clock hour in the morning, when the fear actually comes and sits on our chest in the dark. Why is that? Why is the distance between hearing and living so vast, so persistent, so stubbornly unbridged, even in people who love him? Part of the answer, I think, is that we have quietly decided, without ever quite admitting it to ourselves, that these teachings are ideals, beautiful, inspiring, ultimately impossible ideals, the way a poster of a distant mountain peak is inspiring without ever actually requiring you to climb it. We treat "do not worry" the way we treat the phrase "world peace," a lovely thing to affirm, a noble aspiration to nod along with, not a real and specific instruction we ever genuinely expect ourselves to obey. But Jesus did not speak in ideals. He spoke in direct commands to actual people about their actual next Tuesday. When he said, "Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own," he was not composing inspirational poetry to be admired from a comfortable distance. He was handing his followers a hard and practical instruction for how to survive a genuinely difficult life without being slowly destroyed by it from the inside. Deal with today's trouble today and refuse, actively, deliberately, as a daily discipline, as a repeated act of trust, to pre-live the troubles of a tomorrow that has not come and may never come. That is not an ideal. That is a technique for staying sane, given to us by the sanest man who ever lived. Let us follow that thread of trust deeper, because it runs like a golden wire through everything he taught, and it leads us directly to one of the most famous invitations he ever spoke. Words that have been whispered by more grieving, exhausted, burdened, and broken people over more centuries than perhaps any other words he ever said. "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you shall find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Listen to how wide the door of that invitation swings open. Come to me, all you who labor. All, every single one, not the especially holy. Not those who already have their lives more or less together and are just looking for a little extra encouragement. Not the ones who have earned their rest through sufficient spiritual performance and can now claim it as a reward. All, everyone, anyone. And the word for labor here does not mean only the honest tiredness of the body after a hard day's work. It means the deeper grinding exhaustion of the person who has been trying too hard for too long to hold too much together with too little help. It is the tiredness of the one who has been perpetually performing, managing the impressions they leave on everyone around them, keeping a dozen plates spinning simultaneously and waking each and every morning already exhausted because they know the spinning must begin again the moment their feet hit the floor. It is the tiredness of the person who has been trying to be good enough, religious enough, disciplined enough, giving enough, present enough, successful enough, and who carries always just beneath the surface the constant low awareness that they have not quite managed it and probably never will, and heavy laden, burdened, weighed down, loaded with weights that human frames were simply never designed to carry. The weight of grief that would not lift with time the way everyone kept promising it would. The weight of shame stuck fast to the memory of things done and things left undone, refusing to be dislodged by any amount of self-improvement or the passage of any number of years. The weight of an anxiety so constant and so normalized that the person carrying it has genuinely forgotten what it once felt like to wake without it. The weight of everyone else's expectations, parents and partners and children and communities and cultures, all of them making demands that cannot possibly all be met at once. And the heaviest weight of all, perhaps, the weight of religious performance itself, the exhausting, endless effort to be devoted enough, faithful enough, holy enough, for a God whom some part of you has always secretly suspected is watching with folded arms and a disappointed frown, never quite satisfied no matter how much you manage to do. To all of it, every kind of weariness, every variety of burden, every form of heaviness the human experience is capable of producing, Jesus opens his arms and says one word: come. And notice, this is absolutely crucial. Notice what he does not say. He does not say, try harder. He does not say, pray more, or fix yourself first, or come back to me once you have gotten your life sufficiently in order and are less of a mess. He says, come. Now, as you are with all of it, exactly in the condition you are in at this moment, and the rest he offers is not the rest of doing nothing, the rest of collapse and permanent passivity, because in the very next breath he says, take my yoke upon you. A yoke is a working tool. It is the heavy wooden frame that joins two animals together so that they can share the pulling of a single load. He is not inviting us to stop working and lie down forever. He is inviting us to change what we are yoked to, because most of us are yoked to self-reliance, strapped, harnessed, bound to the crushing labor of carrying our entire lives and our entire futures in our own limited strength, personally responsible for every outcome, personally answerable for every failure, personally holding the whole thing up with arms that are trembling and about to give way. That yoke was never made for human shoulders. It was never designed to be worn by beings as small and fragile as we are, and it is grinding us slowly and steadily into the ground. His yoke, by contrast, is easy. His burden is light, and not because life suddenly becomes effortless the moment you follow him. The difficulties of a human existence do not simply vanish when you trust him. He never once said they would. His yoke is easy because when you are yoked to him, you are never again pulling the load alone. The greater part of the weight, the crushing part, the part that was breaking you, rests on the shoulders of the one who is yoked beside you, and his shoulders are infinite, and his strength never once diminishes, and he does not tire, and he does not resent the pulling, and he will not let go of his side of the frame. The easy yoke is simply the yoke that is worn beside the one who is carrying the far greater portion of everything you thought. In your exhaustion, you were carrying entirely by yourself. And who is it that issues this extraordinary invitation? Not a stranger to weariness, standing on some untroubled height of divine comfort and calling down instructions to the exhausted masses below. Learn of me, he says, for I am meek and lowly in heart. He is speaking from the inside of human tiredness. He knew what it was to be worn out. He sat down at a well at noon, in the heat of the day, because he was genuinely bodily exhausted from traveling, and a Samaritan woman's entire life was transformed precisely because he was tired enough to sit down in that particular place at that particular hour. He fell asleep in the stern of a boat in the middle of a violent storm because he was so completely spent from pouring himself out for the endless crowds that not even the wind and the waves could wake him. He wept real, wet, human tears at the tomb of his friend. He knelt in a garden the night before his death and prayed with such crushing anguish that, Luke the physician records, his sweat fell to the ground like great drops of blood. When this man, this specific man, says, come to me and I will give you rest, he is not speaking from a comfortable distance. He is speaking from within the full, unshielded weight of human experience, from a man who knew in his own body and his own soul exactly what it costs to live a human life in this broken world. He said it for a reason. The reason was rest, real rest, soul rest, the kind of rest that reaches down to the place beneath the place where ordinary sleep operates, the deep interior room that no vacation and no night sleep and no weekend away has ever quite been able to reach. And most of us stay exhausted anyway. We hear, come to me, and I will give you rest, and we do not come. Or we come once, and we feel the burden lift for a moment, a blessed moment, And then we walk out of the room and immediately take the whole weight back onto our own shoulders, and we return to the crushing yoke of self-reliance, and we call it being responsible, and we call it being strong, and we wonder month after month, year after year, why we are so tired all the time. The invitation stands open, the arms have never once lowered, the rest has never expired and never will. And still we labor on alone, just a few feet away from the one who offered, with everything in him, to carry it with us. Let me pause here and speak to something directly, because if you have been listening honestly, really listening, letting these words in rather than holding them at the safe distance where they cannot reach you, then a certain discomfort may be rising in you by now. And I want to name it out loud before it curdles into the wrong thing. You may be feeling, as we lay these teachings out one after another and hold them up honestly against the way we actually live, that you are being exposed, convicted, caught, maybe even a little ashamed. I do worry. I don't forgive. I am yoked to self-reliance and calling it strength. I live day after day as though he never said these things at all. And I want to be very careful with you here, very gentle, because that feeling can go in one of two directions, and only one of them is from him. If that feeling is pushing you down toward despair, toward I am a failure, I will never get this right, what is even the point of trying? Then hear me clearly, that is not the voice of Jesus. That is the voice of the accuser, and it always, always ends in paralysis. And paralysis was never once his goal for you. But if that feeling is the gentle, aching ache of recognition, oh, there is a better way to live than the way I have been living, and I have been missing it, and the door is somehow still open to me, then that is precisely the ache these words were spoken to produce. Remember the very first word of his entire ministry: repent, turn. It was never condemnation. It was the most hopeful thing a person walking the wrong direction could ever hear. The whole point of seeing the gap between his words and our lives is not to drown in the gap, not to stand at its edge and weep over how wide it is. The point is to step across it, and you can, today, right now. From wherever you happen to be sitting or standing or driving as you hear this, that is the entire promise underneath all 100 of these things. The gap is not the message. The gap is only the diagnosis. The healing is the message, and the healing is available. So let us keep walking, and let us walk now into what may be the very hardest of all his teachings, the one we affirm the most loudly and obey the least, the teaching on forgiveness. Peter, who was always the one to say out loud what everyone else was quietly thinking, came to Jesus one day with a question that felt, to him, downright generous. Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Up to 7 times. 7 felt magnanimous. 7 felt like a lot. The rabbis of the day commonly taught that a person was obligated to forgive a repeat offender 3 times, and that after the 3rd offense you were fully within your rights to close the door, to cut them off, to be done with them. Peter, feeling the generous swell of his own newly stretched heart, doubled the rabbinic standard and then added 1 more for good measure. 7. He was, I think, more than half expecting to be praised for the impressive largeness of his forgiving heart. And Jesus looked at him and said, I do not say to you 7 times, but 70 times 7, which was never, ever meant as a literal ceiling of 490, as though you were supposed to keep a careful tally in a little book, marking down each offense, and then on the 491st infraction, you would at last be gloriously free to retaliate, to unleash, to collect. That reading misses the entire point so completely that it turns the teaching upside down. It was meant to explode the whole idea of counting itself. It was meant to say, stop keeping the ledger, throw the little book of offenses into the fire. Forgiveness is not a quota you fill up and then close out. It is not a bank of goodwill that eventually runs dry and entitles you to revenge. It is a way of living, a permanent posture of the heart, a settled and continual refusal to let the endless accounting of who wronged whom become the organizing principle of your entire life. And then, knowing full well that a command this hard, this against the grain, this contrary to every natural instinct of the wounded human heart, needs far more than a command to actually land, knowing we would need not just to be told, but to be shown. Jesus told a story to drive it all the way down into the heart where it could do its work. A servant, he said, owed his king an unpayable debt, 10,000 talents, a sum so astronomically vast that it was essentially a way of saying a debt no human being could ever hope to repay in 100 lifetimes of labor, a number chosen specifically because it could not be conceived of, let alone paid. The king moved to settle accounts and to collect what was owed. The servant, seeing ruin and slavery and the destruction of his whole family bearing down on him, fell on his face and begged for time, for patience, for mercy. And the king, and here is where the story turns and does something no one listening would have expected. The king was moved with compassion, and he did something extraordinary, something far beyond anything the servant had dared to ask for. The servant had begged merely for more time to pay, but the king did not grant more time. He did not restructure the debt. He did not set up a manageable payment plan or reduce the sum to something the man could eventually handle. He forgave it. The whole thing, the entire unpayable, unimaginable, crushing weight of it, wiped clean, cancelled, gone, as though it had never existed. And that same servant, this is the part that makes you catch your breath, that same servant, newly and impossibly and undeservedly free, walked straight out of the palace, still practically dizzy with the mercy he had just received, found a fellow servant who owed him a trivial sum, 100 denarii, a few months' ordinary wages, real money, but absolutely nothing beside the mountain of debt he himself had just been forgiven. And he seized that fellow servant by the throat. He grabbed him and choked him and demanded immediate payment, and when the man could not pay, when the man fell down and begged for patience in the exact same words the first servant had used before the king only moments earlier, he refused and had him thrown into prison until he should pay every last coin. Jesus is not being subtle here. He is not hiding the meaning behind layers of mystery. The story is a mirror, and it is held up deliberately and unavoidably to every single one of us who has ever received the boundless, unpayable, undeserved mercy of God, the cancellation of a debt we could never in 10,000 lifetimes have repaid, and then turned right around and gripped a fellow human being by the throat over a comparatively trivial wound. And I know that as I say this, some of you are thinking of a wound that does not feel trivial at all, not even a little, a betrayal that broke something in you that has never fully healed, an abuse that stole years of your life or your innocence or your ability to trust, a person who genuinely, deeply, undeniably, catastrophically wronged you. And I am not going to stand here and pretend that the 100 denarii always feels like 100 denarii. Sometimes it feels like everything. Sometimes the wound is so deep and so real that the very suggestion of forgiveness feels like an insult, like being asked to declare that what happened to you was fine when it was not fine, when it was the opposite of fine. So hear what forgiveness actually is in the teaching of Jesus, because we have badly, tragically misunderstood it. And the misunderstanding has kept countless wounded people locked in a prison they did not even know they were living in. Forgiveness is not saying the wound did not matter. It is not declaring the wrong to be acceptable, or minimizing it, or excusing it, or pretending it never happened. It is not the absence of justice or the erasure of truth. Forgiveness is the decision to release the debt, to stop demanding that this person pay you back what they can never actually pay, to take your hand off their throat, to hand the entire matter of justice over to a God who sees more clearly than you ever could and judges more justly than you ever will, and then to walk away free. Because here is the terrible, hidden secret of unforgiveness, the thing almost no one tells you. It does not imprison the one who wronged you. It imprisons you. You are the one in the cell. The person you refuse to forgive is very often out there somewhere sleeping soundly, entirely unaware of and completely untouched by the long sentence you are serving on their behalf. They are living their life. You are pacing the cell. Forgiveness is the key that finally lets you out of the prison you did not choose but have been living in all this time. He said it for a reason, and the reason was your freedom. He was not adding one more heavy burden to your already impossibly heavy life. He was trying, with everything in him, to lift off of you the heaviest burden of all, the slow-acting poison of resentment that hardens the heart a little more each year, that sours the days and the decades, that turns a person over enough time into a living monument to a single wound, a shrine built around an old injury and tended faithfully until it consumes the one who tends it. And most of us keep the ledger anyway. We nurse the grievance like something precious. We rehearse the offense in the theater of the mind until we have it memorized, every detail, every word, every expression on their face. We build a small, dark shrine to the thing that was done to us, and we keep its flame burning, and we call it justice, and we do not notice, we genuinely do not notice, that we have moved into the prison ourselves and locked the door from the inside and swallowed the key. He handed us the key. He said, forgive 70 times 7, release the debt, walk out of the cell, come out into the light. And most of us go on living in the cell with the key already resting in our own open hand. There is a phrase Jesus tucked into the prayer he taught us, the prayer we say so often and so quickly that we no longer actually hear the words, and it belongs right here in the middle of all this. Forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors, as, in the same measure, with the same openness. He knits our receiving of mercy and our giving of mercy together into a single, inseparable motion. Not because God's forgiveness of us is somehow grudging or coldly conditional or held hostage in a transaction, but because a heart that has truly received an entire ocean of mercy and genuinely understood the magnitude of what it received simply cannot, in the same breath, refuse a single cup of that same mercy to someone else. It is not that God withholds his forgiveness until we perform ours. It is that if we find ourselves still clutching the ledger, still gripping the grievance, still refusing to release the debt, it is a sign, not that God's mercy is unavailable to us, but that we have not yet let it all the way in. The unforgiving heart is, at bottom, the heart that has not yet felt the full weight and wonder of its own forgiveness. And so the invitation to forgive others is really underneath everything, an invitation to go deeper into being forgiven ourselves, to let the mercy we have received sink so far down, so completely, that it begins to leak out of us in every direction, toward everyone who has ever wronged us, almost without our trying. That is the whole mechanism of it. He said it for a reason. Now we have been moving through the great themes of his teaching, and I want to turn to one that Jesus spoke about more often than almost any other single subject. More than heaven, more than hell, more than prayer, more than almost anything else we tend to associate with religious concern. He spoke about money, about possessions, about wealth and its silent, tenacious grip on the human heart. And he spoke about it not because he was obsessed with money, and not because he wanted anyone's money, but because he understood with a clarity that reads like an X-ray that money is never only money, that it is the great rival God, the thing most likely of all things to climb up onto the throne of a human heart and quietly rule a life that imagines itself perfectly free. No one, he said, can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Notice what he did not say. He did not say it is difficult to serve both, that it requires careful balance and constant vigilance, but can with effort be managed. He said it is impossible. Not hard, impossible. Not because money is evil in itself. Money is a tool, morally neutral in the hand, capable of feeding the hungry or corrupting the soul, depending entirely on where it sits in the order of a life. He said it is impossible because money makes a claim on the deepest allegiance of the human heart, and that the throne at the center of a life, seats only one. He even gave the rival a name, an old word, mammon, and he spoke of it almost as if it were a person, a spirit, a power with a will and an appetite, something that wants to own you. And his verdict was absolute. You will end up loving one and despising the other. There is no stable arrangement in which both God and money sit comfortably together on the throne of a heart. One of them is going to be God, and the other is going to be a servant, and the entire trajectory and character of a human life depends, more than we like to admit, on which is which. And then he told story after story to make it unforgettable. He told of the rich fool whose land produced so abundantly that he ran out of room to store all his crops, and who said to himself in deep satisfaction, I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods, and I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. And God said to him, Fool, this very night your soul shall be required of you, and then whose will they be, all these things you have prepared? Not because building barns is a sin, not because saving or planning or prospering is wrong, but because the man had made the single most catastrophic error a human being can make. He had invested his entire soul, the whole of his hope and identity and security, in a store of wealth that death would render utterly meaningless in a single night. And he had never once, not for a moment, looked up from his barns and his balance sheets to consider the God who gave him the harvest in the first place, or the neighbors just outside his gate with whom he could have shared his impossible abundance. He told of a rich young man who came running to him, earnest and sincere and clearly hungry for something more, who had kept all the commandments faithfully since his youth, who genuinely and truly wanted eternal life. And Jesus, the text tells us, looking at him, loved him. And out of that love, he said the one thing that would set the young man free, Go, sell what you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come, follow me. And the young man went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. It is one of the only times in all four Gospels that a person whom Jesus directly and personally invited to follow him turned and walked away. And he walked away not because the teaching was confusing or unclear. He walked away precisely because it was too clear. He had not come to Jesus holding his wealth lightly as a tool he could set down. His wealth was holding him. The possessions he believed he owned, in fact, owned him, quietly and completely. And when the moment of decision finally came, when it narrowed down to Jesus or the money won, and he turned and walked back into his old life. Sorrowful, note, not relieved, sorrowful, because some part of him knew, even as he walked away, that he had just traded the pearl of great price for a handful of coins he would have to leave behind anyway on the day he died. Why did Jesus talk about money more than he talked about heaven? Because he knew us. He knew us all the way down. He knew that the love of money is not a rare sin belonging only to the greedy few, the obvious villains, the misers, and the tycoons. He knew it is a gravitational pull exerted on very nearly every human heart, so constant and so quiet that we mistake it for the natural order of things, for simple common sense, for being responsible. He knew that we would tell ourselves comfortably and continually that we could serve God with our hearts while serving Mammon with our actual lives, our schedules, our anxieties, our decisions, our sense of who is winning, and he wanted to close that particular escape hatch before we crawled through it and lost ourselves on the other side. Where your treasure is, he said, there will your heart be also. And notice the direction of that sentence, because it is the opposite of what we assume. We think the heart leads and the treasure obediently follows, that we will love God first in our hearts and then someday eventually get around to putting our finances and our schedules in order to match. But Jesus reverses it entirely. Put your treasure somewhere, he says, and your heart will migrate to join it. The heart follows the treasure, not the other way around. Which means that the question, where is my money actually going? Where is my time actually going? Where is my energy and my worry and my attention actually going? That question is really the far deeper question. Where is my heart going? And the honest answer for most of us, if we dare to trace it, is uncomfortable. He said all of this for a reason, and the reason was not to make us poor. It was to make us free. He knew that money makes an excellent servant and an absolutely monstrous master, and he wanted us to have it and use it as a servant and never ever be quietly owned by it as a master. And most of us, even those of us who would never in 1,000 years call ourselves greedy, who give a little here and there and mean well and think of ourselves as generous enough, most of us organize our actual lives, our real schedules, our deepest anxieties, our fundamental sense of security and self-worth around the accumulation and the protection of possessions. And then we wonder, quietly, why our hearts feel so divided and so restless and so tired. We are trying to serve two masters. He told us plainly it could not be done. And most of us are living day after day as a kind of ongoing experiment in trying to prove him wrong, and losing a little more year after year. Let me stop right here and hand you something to hold, because we have covered a great deal of hard ground, and I do not want these teachings to pile up on you as one more crushing burden, one more impossible list. So here, gently, pick one, not all of them. One. Out of everything we have walked through so far, the turning, the following, the not worrying, the coming and resting, the forgiving, the loosening of money's grip on the heart, one of them has been quietly pressing on you more than the others. You know which one it is. It is the one you flinched at. It is the one that made you a little uncomfortable. The one you would rather I had not brought up. The one your mind is already trying to slide past. That flinch is not an accusation against you. It is an invitation to you. It is the gentle finger of a good physician finding the exact spot that needs healing, not to hurt you, but because that is where the healing has to begin. You do not have to fix your whole life tonight. You do not have to master all 100 things by morning. You have to turn once toward the one thing he has put his finger on. That is how a whole life actually changes. Not all at once, in some heroic overnight transformation, but one turn at a time, starting with the single turn you have been avoiding. And now, I want to lead us into what may be the deepest water of all, because up to this point we have been talking mostly about the things Jesus said for us to do, the commands, the instructions, the way of life he laid out. But underneath all of those, holding all of those up, there was something even more radical, something that changes the meaning of everything else. There were the things Jesus said about who he was, because he did not present himself merely as a great teacher, handing down wise instructions from a safe and admirable distance. If he had done only that, we could keep him at arm's length and admire him comfortably, the way we admire Socrates or Confucius or Marcus Aurelius. Great minds, wise voices, safely dead, making no personal claim on our lives. But Jesus made claims about himself that make comfortable distance impossible. He made claims so large, so staggering, so far beyond anything a mere teacher would ever say, that they force a decision from anyone who actually hears them. You cannot stay neutral about a man who says the things he said about himself. I am the bread of life, he said. Whoever comes to me shall never hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst. I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I am the true vine. 7 times in the Gospel of John alone, he begins with those same 2 words, I am. And every single listener who was steeped in the Hebrew Scriptures, which was every listener he was speaking to, would have felt the ground shift beneath their feet. Because I am was the very name that God himself spoke to Moses out of the burning bush. When Moses asked the voice in the flames who he should say had sent him, the answer came back, I am that I am. Tell them I am has sent you. It was the holiest name, the unspeakable name, the name so sacred that devout people would not pronounce it. And here was a carpenter from the nothing town of Nazareth, taking that unspeakable, ground-shaking name onto his own lips, and completing the sentence with the bread, the light, the door, the shepherd, the resurrection, the way, the vine. This is not the language of a humble moral teacher offering helpful advice. This is a man standing up in the middle of history and claiming in words his hearers could not possibly misunderstand, to be God in human flesh. There is a famous observation about the trap this sets, and it is worth stating plainly because it strips away the comfortable middle ground we all try to stand on. A man who was merely a man and who said the sorts of things Jesus said about himself would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level of a man who sincerely claims to be a poached egg, or else he would be something far worse, a deliberate deceiver, a liar on a cosmic scale. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is exactly who he said he was, the Son of God, God himself come among us, or else he was a madman or something even more sinister. But the one thing he has not left open to us, the one option he took off the table himself with his own words, is the option most people today quietly choose. To pat him on the head as a nice teacher of gentle ethics, a wise and kindly figure whose moral advice we can take or leave as it suits us. He did not leave that door open. He slammed it shut himself when he stood up in front of the world and said, I am. And notice what he claimed to be one by one, because it is not random. Each of those 7 declarations reaches for a different and specific ache in the human heart. He did not claim to be a philosopher offering a system to be studied or a guru offering a technique to be practiced. He offered himself, his own person, as the answer to the deepest hungers of the human soul. Are you hungry? Not in the stomach, but in the soul, hungry for meaning, for purpose, for a fullness that food and success and achievement and even love have never quite been able to deliver, a hunger that comes back every time, no matter how much you feed it. I am the bread, he says. I am the bread of life, and whoever comes to me shall never hunger. Are you lost in the dark, unsure which way is even up, groping for something solid to hold on to in a world that seems to have no fixed points left? I am the light of the world. I am the door. I am the way. Are you afraid of death, your own death, or worse, the death of someone you cannot imagine surviving the loss of? I am the resurrection and the life. He did not point away from himself toward some answer located elsewhere. He claimed again and again to be the answer himself. Every ache in the human heart he stood in front of and said, in effect, Me, what you have been searching for, in 1,000 places that could never hold it, in 1,000 substitutes that always left you empty. It was me, all along. This is the hinge on which everything turns. Because if that claim is false, then the teachings we have been walking through together are simply the beautiful ethics of a deeply deluded man. And we are free to take them or leave them as we please, admire the good parts and discard the rest. But if that claim is true, if the one who said do not worry is in fact the bread of life, if the one who said forgive is in fact the resurrection and the life, if the one who said come to me and rest is in fact the great I am speaking from within human flesh, then these are not the gentle suggestions of a wise teacher that we may weigh at our leisure. They are the words of the one who made you, spoken with the full weight and authority of the same voice that spoke the galaxies into being out of nothing. And that changes absolutely everything about how we ought to hold them. You can respectfully disagree with a teacher. You cannot casually disregard your maker. He said, I am, for a reason. And the reason was not merely to impress us with his status or to demand our worship for its own sake. The reason was to give us something solid enough to actually stand on when everything else in life gives way beneath us. He was saying, when your own strength finally fails, and it will, I am the bread that does not run out. When your path disappears into fog and you cannot see a single step ahead, and it will, I am the way. When the darkness closes in around you and you cannot find the light switch anywhere, and it will, I am the light. When death comes and takes what you love most, and there is nothing you can do to stop it, and it will, I am the resurrection. He was offering himself to us as the floor beneath the floor, the ground beneath the ground, the one thing that holds firm when every other thing we were standing on gives way. And most of us live as though he were an optional inspirational figure, a nice addition to an already full and self-sufficient life, a bit of spiritual seasoning sprinkled on top of a meal we have basically prepared ourselves. We treat the bread of life like a garnish. We treat the light of the world like a candle we might light if the mood ever happens to be right and the evening calls for it. He stood up and said, I am, the ground of all being, the very name of God, and most of us live day to day, as though what he actually said was, perhaps. Let us sit for a moment with one of those 7 great claims in particular, because it addresses the fear that sits silently underneath all our other fears, the deepest and most primal fear of all, the fear of death. I am the resurrection and the life. He said it standing outside the tomb of his friend Lazarus, a man who had already been 4 days dead, to a grieving sister named Martha, who had just said to him, with the flat, hollow exhaustion of the freshly bereaved, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And Jesus did not correct her grief. He did not minimize it or explain it away or rush her past it towards some tidier feeling. He entered into it. In fact, a few moments later, standing at the mouth of that tomb, the shortest verse in the whole of Scripture records what he did. Jesus wept. The one who was, within minutes, about to raise the dead man back to life, stood at his grave and cried real, wet, human tears, because the love was real and the loss was real, and he did not stand above human grief like a distant God untouched by our sorrows. He stepped down into the very middle of it and wept with the weeping. And only then, from inside the grief and not above it, he spoke into it. I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. And then he called a 4 days dead man out of a sealed tomb by name. Lazarus, come forth. And the dead man came out, still wrapped in his grave clothes, blinking in the light, alive. Why does this matter so enormously for how we live our ordinary lives right now, today, long before we reach our own tombs? Because the fear of death, usually unspoken, usually buried deep, usually kept carefully out of sight, But almost always there, humming quietly beneath the surface of all our frantic activity, is the hidden engine of so much of what deforms us and drives us and exhausts us. We grasp desperately at security because underneath it all, we are afraid of the end. We chase legacy and reputation and being remembered because we cannot bear the thought of simply vanishing, of being forgotten as though we never were. We avoid the subject of death entirely, filling every possible silence with noise and distraction and endless scrolling, precisely so that we never have to sit still long enough to feel the cold fact that we are mortal and the clock is running and no amount of success will stop it. And Jesus walks straight up to the tomb, to the very thing we spend our whole lives fleeing from, and he says, "I am the resurrection." Not I know about resurrection. Not I have a comforting philosophy that might make death feel a little less frightening if you think about it the right way. I am it. Death in his presence is no longer a wall that everything crashes into and ends against. It is a door. And if that is true, if it is actually really true, then the great primal fear that secretly drives so much of our grasping and hiding and numbing and striving has been defanged at the very root. We can live differently, more freely, more generously, more fearlessly. We can loosen our grip on all the things we clutch so tightly because the worst thing that could ever happen to us, death itself, has been transformed in him from a final ending into a doorway, from the end of the story into the turning of a page. He said it for a reason, and the reason was to pull the fear of death up and out of us by the roots so that we could finally, fully, freely live. And most of us carry that fear anyway, all our lives long, letting it dictate our choices from the shadows, quietly shaping our decisions and our grasping and our fears. Having heard the one who said, "I am the resurrection," and never quite letting the words go deep enough to loosen the grip of the grave on our imagination and our living. I want to gather something up here, because we are well along in our walk now, and a pattern has emerged that I do not want you to miss. Because seeing it clearly changes how you hear everything else. In every single teaching we have touched, the turning, the following, the trusting, the resting, the forgiving, the freeing of the heart from money's grip, and now the great I am claims and the conquering of death, the very same shape keeps appearing over and over without a single exception. Jesus says a thing for a reason, and the reason is always, every time, our liberation. Our healing, our life. He never once, not in a single recorded word, spoke to diminish us or to trap us or to weigh us down for its own sake. Every command is a door, every hard saying is a scalpel in the steady hand of a surgeon who fully intends to heal. Every claim he makes about himself is an offer of something solid to stand on, and in every single case, without exception, the tragedy is exactly the same. We affirm the words, and we ignore them. We frame the medicine beautifully on the wall, and we never once swallow it. We admire the door, we praise the door, we write songs about the door, and we never walk through it. The question that ought to be burning in us by now, the question this whole teaching has been circling toward, is simply why? Why is this gap so persistent, so stubborn, so resistant to all our sincerity? Why do good people who genuinely love Jesus live so consistently and so tragically as though he never actually spoke? And I think the answer is worth naming plainly and honestly, because naming it clearly is the beginning of closing it. Part of it is that we've been taught subtly and over a long time to separate belief from life, to imagine that Christianity is primarily a set of things you affirm in your head rather than a way you actually walk with your feet. We have quietly turned faith into a mental transaction. Agree to these propositions, sign here, and you are in, you are safe. The matter is settled. And Jesus never once, not anywhere, framed it that way. He framed it as following, as a road to be walked, a yoke to be worn, a way to be lived, a daily taking up of a cross. Belief for him was never mere intellectual agreement. It was trust, and trust is something you do with your whole life, not a box you tick once with your mind and then set aside. The gap between hearing and living is, very often, exactly the gap between agreeing with Jesus and actually trusting him. And we have been quietly trained, generation after generation, to believe that agreement is enough. It is not enough. It was never enough. The demons, one of his followers would later write, believe and tremble. Belief that stays in the head and never travels down into the life and out through the hands is not yet the thing he was asking for. Part of it, too, is that the teachings are genuinely costly, and we are genuinely afraid. To stop worrying means to actually let go of the illusion of control. And control, however illusory it always turns out to be, feels safer to us than trust. To forgive means to release a debt we feel entitled to collect. And the grievance, however slowly it poisons us, feels like justice, feels like something we have a right to. To loosen money's grip means to become vulnerable in exactly the way our entire culture screams at us never to be. To follow means to leave something behind on the shore. Every one of these teachings asks us to trade a false security for a real freedom. And the trade almost always feels, in the moment of decision, like a loss long before it ever reveals itself as a gain. And so, we hesitate. We stand on the shore and admire the boat and praise the boat and never quite climb in. We know the words, we even love the words. But the water looks cold, and the shore feels solid, and so we stay. And part of it, honestly, is that many of us have simply never been told clearly that the gap can be closed. That these are not impossible ideals reserved for spiritual superheroes and ancient saints, but genuinely livable realities for ordinary, weary, failing people like you and like me, closed not by heroic effort and gritted teeth, but by the daily, humble, endlessly repeated turning toward the one who first spoke them. Which is exactly what I want to talk about before we are through. But first, let us finish walking through his words, because there are teachings we have not yet touched that go straight to the very center of how we treat one another. And how we treat one another may well be, in the end, the truest test of whether his words have gone into us at all. Because on the last night, in the final hours before his arrest, when a teacher's last words carry the full weight of everything he most once remembered, Jesus gathered his closest friends around a table and gave them what he himself called a new commandment. A new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another. As I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love one to another. Sit with the sheer audacity of the standard he set. Not love one another as you love yourselves. That was the old commandment, and it was already hard enough to keep anyone awake at night. Love one another as I have loved you. And how had he loved them? He was, at that very hour, only hours away from laying down his own life for them in the most brutal way the ancient world had devised. Earlier that same evening, he had knelt down on the floor in front of each of them and washed their feet, the filthy, dust-caked feet of men who had walked all day on unpaved roads, which was the task of the lowest household servant, a job so demeaning that a Jewish master could not even command a Jewish slave to do it. And he had washed the feet of Judas, whom he knew at that very moment was already in the process of betraying him to his death. That is the standard. That is the as. Love one another the way I, on my knees, with a towel around my waist, washing the feet of the man who is about to sell me for 30 pieces of silver on my way to die for people who will scatter and deny me before the sun comes up. Love one another like that. And then, staggeringly, he said that this love, this specific quality of love, would be the proof. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, not by your correct doctrine, though doctrine has its place, not by your moral rectitude, though how we live certainly matters, not by the size of your buildings, or the eloquence of your preaching, or the precision of your theology, or the volume of your worship, by your love for one another. He staked the entire visible credibility of his whole movement in front of a watching and skeptical world on one single thing: whether his people would love each other the way he had loved them. That love was to be the sign hung over the entire enterprise, the banner over the door, the one thing that would make the watching world stop and wonder and ask what on earth could possibly account for it. And here, perhaps more than anywhere else, is where the gap between his words and our lives becomes not merely a private tragedy, but a public one, a tragedy the whole world gets to watch. Because the world has in fact been watching all this time. And what has it too often seen? It has seen the people who bear his name fracture into 1,000 warring factions, each certain the others have it wrong. It has seen believers treat one another with a contempt and a cruelty they would be ashamed to show a stranger on the street. It has seen the very people who carry his name using that name as a weapon, drawing lines, keeping scores, loving the ones who agree with them and despising the ones who do not, which is the exact and precise opposite of the sign he asked them to hang over the door. He gave us one commandment to serve as the badge of belonging to him, the single mark by which the world would know us. And we have too often worn every badge but that one. He said it for a reason. The reason was that this kind of love, costly, foot-washing, betrayer-forgiving, self-emptying love, would be the one thing that finally convinced a hardened and skeptical world that God is real and that he is love. And most of us, most of the time, have loved instead the way the world already loves, the ones who are easy to love, the ones who love us back, the ones on our side of the line. Which is to say, we have too often lived as though he never gave the commandment at all. But let me not leave that hanging in the air as an accusation, because it is meant as an invitation, and the invitation is genuinely beautiful. He is asking us to become the proof. He is saying that the world will meet him, will actually encounter the living God, not primarily through winning arguments or building institutions, but through the shocking, unmistakable, humanly inexplicable love of ordinary people who have no natural reason on earth to love one another and who love one another anyway. Every time you forgive someone you have every right to resent, every time you serve someone who can never repay you, every time you cross a line the world insists should divide you, you become a small, living, walking argument for the reality of God. That is what he handed us on his last night. Not a heavy burden, but a staggering dignity, the chance to be the visible evidence of an invisible love. He said it for a reason. The reason was that the world would see him, actually see him in us. There is a companion to that commandment, spoken earlier in his ministry, that stretches it even further. Past the friend, past the fellow believer, all the way out to the enemy. You have heard that it was said, "You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy." But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. For he makes his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. This may well be the single most humanly impossible thing he ever said, and he said it without softening it, without adding a single qualification or exception. Love your enemies, not tolerate them, not merely avoid them and wish them gone, not quietly hope for their downfall while maintaining a thin veneer of public civility. Love them and pray for them, and not pray against them, not pray for their ruin dressed up in religious language, but pray for them, for their actual good. And the reason he gives is at once the most beautiful and the most demanding reason imaginable, that you may be the children of your Father. He is saying that this kind of love that flows freely toward those who have not earned it and never could earn it, love that is not a response to worthiness, but an overflow of goodness. This is the very family resemblance of God himself. God sends his sun and his rain, the daily necessities of life itself, on the good and the evil alike, indiscriminately, generously, without first checking the ledger to see who has earned it. And when we love our enemies, we are doing the family thing. We are showing whose children we are. We are participating in our own small and stumbling way, in the very nature of a God whose love is not a reward for the deserving, but a free and reckless overflow of his own boundless goodness. Why would he ask something so impossibly, painfully hard? Because he knew, with perfect clarity, that nothing else in all the world actually breaks the cycle. Hatred answered with hatred only multiplies the hatred. Violence answered with violence only escalates the violence. The wound repaid with a wound only deepens and widens the wound and passes it on to the next generation. The only thing that has ever actually stopped the ancient grinding machinery of retaliation is a love that flatly refuses to play its assigned part. A love that absorbs the blow and does not return it, that meets cursing with blessing, that answers persecution with prayer. It is the hardest thing in the entire world, and it is also the only thing that has ever genuinely changed the world. He did not command it because it was easy or because it came naturally. He commanded it because it is the only thing that actually works, and because it was precisely what he himself was about to do on a cross, with iron nails driven through his hands, praying, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," over the very men who were in that moment killing him. He said it for a reason, and then he lived the reason all the way down into the grave and out the other side. And most of us cannot manage to love the driver who cut us off in traffic this morning, let alone the person who genuinely and deeply wounded us years ago, and we have quietly filed "love your enemies" under lovely in theory, impossible in practice, which is precisely the drawer, the locked cabinet, where his hardest and most transforming words go to be admired and forgotten. Let me slow us down again here, because we have been climbing steadily, and the air gets thin up at this height. And I do not want you to hear all of this as a mountain too high and too sheer for anyone like you to climb. Because here is the thing about loving your enemy, about forgiving 70 times 7, about not worrying, about all of it, every impossible sounding one of them. You were never once asked to generate these things out of your own resources. This is the piece we so consistently miss, and missing it is exactly what turns the teachings of Jesus into an exhausting, impossible moral checklist that finally crushes the very people who try hardest to keep it. Look again closely at how he framed the command to love. "As I have loved you." The love comes first, his love for us, and our love for others flows out of it, downstream from it, as a consequence of it. We do not manufacture love for our enemies by gritting our teeth and straining our willpower until something that looks vaguely like love appears. We receive an ocean of undeserved love from God, and then we simply let it overflow. Look again at the command to love the enemy, "that you may be the children of your Father." We love the way the Father loves because we belong to the Father, because his very life is in us, because we are drawing on his infinite resources and not on our own thin and quickly exhausted supply. The whole thing runs on grace received, not on willpower summoned. You cannot squeeze forgiveness out of an empty heart, no matter how hard you squeeze. But a heart that has been genuinely filled, that has actually received and felt the mercy of God all the way down, begins to leak that same mercy in every direction, almost without trying, almost without noticing. The command to love is really, underneath everything, an invitation to be filled. Filled so full that the love simply spills out of you and onto everyone around you. This is the secret to closing the whole gap, and it changes how you hear every single hard thing he ever said. He's not standing over you, arms crossed, demanding that you produce out of your own strength what you do not have and cannot generate. He is standing beside you, yoked to you, offering to be himself the source of everything he asks of you. The yoke is easy because he is pulling it with you. The love is possible because he is loving through you. He said, in that same last night, abide in me, remain, stay, dwell, like a branch joined to a vine. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Not very little, nothing. And the flip side of that hard-sounding word is one of the most glorious promises in all of Scripture, connected to him, abiding in him, drawing life from him the way a branch draws sap from the vine. You can do the very things that were flatly impossible on your own. The forgiveness comes, the peace comes, the love for the enemy comes, not from you, through you. That is the entire difference between a religion that exhausts you until you finally give up and a relationship that fills you until you overflow. And Jesus never, not for one single moment, intended the former for you. He intended the latter. He always did. Now let us turn toward the way he talked about the kingdom of God, because it was his great theme, the thing he returned to more often than any other, and understanding it reframes the whole of how we are meant to live. He rarely defined it outright, in plain propositions. Instead, he told stories, parables, little explosive devices of meaning, wrapped in the ordinary stuff of farming and fishing and baking and family life that slipped quietly past our defenses and then detonated in the heart when we least expected it. The kingdom of heaven, he said, is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found, and in his joy hid again, and then went and sold all that he had, and bought that field. Again, he said, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking fine pearls, who, when he had found one pearl of great price, went and sold all that he had and bought it. Feel the emotional temperature of those two little stories, because it quietly corrects almost everything we tend to get wrong about following Jesus. The man who found the treasure buried in that field did not sell everything he owned grimly, reluctantly, out of cold duty, sighing at the terrible sacrifice of it all. He did it in his joy. That is the phrase, and it is everything. He had found something so staggeringly valuable that giving up absolutely everything else he owned to obtain it was not experienced as a loss at all. It was the most obvious, most delighted, most joyful transaction of his entire life. He would have been an absolute fool to do anything other than sell it all. That is exactly how Jesus wants us to understand the so-called cost of following him. Yes, it costs everything. Yes, there is a field to be bought, a pearl that takes all you have, but it is not the tragic, tearful surrender of something precious for the sake of grim religious obligation. It is the joyful, laughing trade of lesser things for the one thing that is worth more than all of them put together and multiplied 1,000 times over. We have too often preached the cost of following Jesus as though it were mainly and mostly loss. Give up this, deny yourself that, take up your cross, surrender, sacrifice, and all of that is true, and none of it is the point. The point is the treasure. The point is the pearl. The point is that what you find is so immeasurably greater than what you give up, that the giving up, seen in the blazing light of the finding, feels like nothing but joy. He said it for a reason. And the reason was to reorder our entire sense of value from the ground up, to show us that we spend our lives clutching handfuls of gravel because we have never once seen the diamond, and that the moment we truly see it, the moment we glimpse what he is actually offering, the loosening of our grip on the gravel is not a painful sacrifice at all, but an overwhelming relief. And most of us have heard about the treasure and never gone looking for the field. We are far too busy managing our little piles of gravel, guarding them, counting them, so completely convinced that the gravel is what security looks like that we cannot even imagine the joy of trading it for something we have not yet held in our own hands. Faith is in large part exactly this, trusting the man who found the treasure enough to go and dig where he is pointing before you have seen it for yourself. And the kingdom, he insisted again and again, does not arrive the way we expect it to. We keep looking for it in the big and the loud and the powerful and the impressive. and he kept pointing patiently at the small and the quiet and the hidden and the slow. The kingdom of heaven, he said, is like a grain of mustard seed, the smallest of all the seeds, which a man took and planted in his field, and which grew up into a tree so large that the birds of the air came and nested in its branches. It is like leaven, like yeast, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour until the whole of it was leavened, worked all the way through invisibly from the inside out. This is how the kingdom of God actually moves through the world and through a single human life, not usually in dramatic overnight cinematic transformation, but in the small, the hidden, the slow, the quiet, the almost invisible, a tiny seed buried in dark soil, a pinch of yeast working unseen through a great mass of dough. And this matters enormously for how we live, because it means we must stop despising small beginnings and slow growth. It means the tiny act of obedience today, the one forgiveness offered, the one honest prayer prayed, the one refusal to worry, the one enemy blessed instead of cursed, is not nothing, is never nothing. It is a mustard seed. It is yeast in the flour. It is the kingdom coming quietly in a way the world will never once put on the news, and it will grow in time into something large enough to shelter birds. He said it for a reason. The reason was to keep us faithful in the small things, trusting that God does his very largest work through what looks, at the time it is happening, like almost nothing at all. Now, I want to be honest with you about something Jesus said that we tend to hurry past because it does not fit comfortably with the gentle, undemanding image of him that many of us prefer to carry around. He talked about a narrow gate. Enter by the narrow gate, he said, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and many there are who go in by it, because narrow is the gate and hard is the way which leads unto life, and few there be that find it. We do not like this saying. It disturbs our comfortable modern assumption that everyone is basically fine and that all roads lead, more or less, to the same pleasant destination in the end. But Jesus, who was love itself made flesh, who wept over the city, who welcomed the outcast and touched the leper and forgave the dying thief hanging next to him, this very same Jesus said plainly that the way to life is narrow and the way to destruction is wide, and he said it not to frighten us into submission, but to wake us up before it was too late. Because here is what the narrow gate actually means, and it is not at all what the cruel street preacher made it mean. It means that the way of life, the way of trust over control, of forgiveness over grievance, of love over self-protection, of the treasure over the gravel, will always in this world be the road less traveled, because it runs directly against the grain of the whole world and against the fallen instinct of the human heart. The wide road is wide precisely because it is the path of least resistance. Worry, because everyone worries. Resent, because it feels like justice. Grab, because everyone else is grabbing. Protect yourself first, because no one else will do it for you. That broad road is easy to walk, because you can walk it half asleep, carried along by the crowd and the current, never once having to make a real decision. The narrow way, by contrast, requires that you wake up, that you choose, that you deliberately go against the flow of everyone around you. It is hard, not because God has cruelly made the entrance too small for ordinary people to fit through, but because the way of trust and love and surrender is genuinely narrow. You cannot walk it while also carrying all the heavy baggage of the wide road. You have to set things down to fit through the gate. You have to lay down the grievance, the grasping, the need for control, the illusion of self-sufficiency. He said it for a reason, and the reason was to tell us the plain truth, that the good life, the life that actually leads somewhere worth arriving at, is not the automatic default setting. It does not happen by drifting. It has to be chosen, and chosen again, and chosen once more against the current, day after day after day. And most of us drift. We take the wide road not by any real decision, but simply by default, carried along by the crowd, and we call the drifting normal, and we never once notice that we chose nothing at all. He also warned us, and this warning cuts especially close to the very center of everything we have been talking about today, about the difference between saying and doing. Not everyone who says unto me, Lord, Lord, he said, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that does the will of my Father which is in heaven. And then he told of two builders. One built his house upon a rock, the other built his house upon the sand. And when the rains descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon both of those houses, the house built on the rock stood firm, but the house built on the sand fell. And great, he said, was the fall of it. And here is the single detail we so often rush right past without noticing. Both men heard the words, both of them. The difference between the wise builder and the foolish one was not hearing. Both builders heard exactly the same teaching, the same sermon, the same words of Jesus. The one and only difference was that one of them heard and did, and the other heard and did not. The one who built on the rock, Jesus said explicitly, is the one who hears these words of mine and does them. The one who built on the sand is the one who hears these words of mine and does not do them. Do you see now why this particular teaching belongs at the very center of our subject today? This is the entire matter, named and diagnosed by Jesus himself, 2,000 years before you sat down to hear this. He knew, he said it plainly, right out loud, that it would be entirely possible to hear his words, all 100 of them, to admire them, to affirm them, to nod along with them, to say, Lord, Lord, with real sincerity, to build an entire religious identity and a whole church-going life on the hearing of them, and to remain the entire time a man building his house on sand. The storms, he was careful to say, come to every house. The rains and the floods and the winds of a hard life fall on the believer and the unbeliever alike. Jesus never once promised otherwise, never once suggested that following him would exempt you from suffering. The difference is not whether the storm comes. The storm always comes. The difference is what your house is built on when it does. And the house that stands is not the house of the one who heard the most sermons or affirmed the most doctrines or could quote the most verses from memory. It is the house of the one who did, who took the words and actually built his real, daily, ordinary life upon them, brick by brick, choice by choice, turn by turn, until the words were no longer merely decorations hanging on the walls, but the very foundation buried deep beneath the floor, holding everything up when the flood finally came. He said it for a reason. The reason was the storm he knew with perfect certainty was coming for every single one of us, and most of us. And this is the deep ache at the very heart of everything we have said together today. Most of us are building on sand, while sincerely, genuinely saying, Lord, Lord, having heard every word and done almost none of them, and the rains have not fully come yet, and we do not know, and we cannot know, and we do not want to know how our house will stand when they finally do. But Jesus is not saying this to terrify us or to leave us in despair. He is saying it urgently, lovingly, while there is still time. Still time to move the house, still time to take the words we have so long admired and begin today, this very hour, to build our actual lives upon them for real. That is the whole invitation buried in this teaching. That is the difference between the two builders. And thank God, it is a difference we still get to choose. Let me hold all of this together now and speak to you very plainly, because we have walked through a great deal of his teaching, and if it has landed the way I hope and pray it has, you are feeling the weight and the wonder of it both at once. You are seeing perhaps more clearly than you ever have before, both how impossibly good his words are and how far your life, my life, all our lives, has drifted from them. And I do not want you to walk away from this teaching carrying only the gap, because the gap, remember, is not the message. The gap is only the diagnosis. The message is that the gap can be crossed, that the whole reason he spoke these 100 things was never to measure us and find us wanting, but to heal us and make us whole, and that the healing is available right now, tonight, from wherever you are sitting as you hear these words. So how? How does a real person, not a spiritual hero, not an ancient saint, but an ordinary, tired, failing person like you and like me, actually begin to live these things instead of merely admiring them from the shore? Let me give you what the teaching itself gives us, gathered up from everything we have walked through together. 4 simple movements that hold the whole thing. First, it begins with turning, not with trying harder. Remember the very first word of his entire ministry: repent, metanoia, turn. The gap does not close by white-knuckling your way toward being a better person through sheer force of effort. It never has. It closes by turning, again and again, as many times a day as you need to, 10,000 times if that is what it takes. When you catch yourself worrying, you do not scold yourself and add shame on top of the fear. You simply turn, and you hand the fear to the Father who feeds the birds. When you catch yourself gripping a grievance, rehearsing the offense, you do not despair over how unforgiving your heart still is. You turn, and you release the debt into the hands of the one who released yours. The Christian life is not one single heroic turn made once and forever. It is 10,000 small turns made over a lifetime, and every single one of them is available to you the very moment you notice you have drifted. You are never more than one turn away from him. Never. That is grace. That is the door that was flung open at the very beginning and has never once closed. Second, it runs on receiving before it ever runs on doing. Every hard command we walked through today was preceded by a gift. Forgive, because you have first been forgiven an unpayable debt. Love, because you have first been loved with a love you did not earn. Do not worry, because you have a Father who sees you and knows what you need before you ask. Come and rest, because the yoke is shared, and the heavy end is on his shoulders. You cannot give what you have not first received. And the great and exhausting mistake of the religious life is trying to produce the fruit without staying connected to the vine. So before you try to do a single thing, he said, receive. Sit still in the plain fact that you are loved. Not because you have earned it, not because your life is finally in order, not because you have kept the rules well enough this week, but freely, now, exactly as you are, in the middle of the mess. Let that love in. Let it go all the way down, past the defenses, past the shame, into the deep places that have been closed off for years. Because the love that goes in is the only thing that ever comes back out as forgiveness and peace and courage and the strength to love an enemy. We love, his own follower wrote, because he first loved us. The doing flows out of the receiving, never the other way around, not once, not ever. Third, it is built one single brick at a time, in the small and the hidden and the unremarkable. Remember the mustard seed. Remember the yeast. Remember the 2 builders. You do not close the gap between his words and your life in one dramatic, cinematic, overnight transformation. You close it the way a house is actually built. One brick, one choice, one obedience at a time. One forgiveness offered today, one refusal to worry tonight. One enemy prayed for this week, one honest prayer that dares to say Father and actually means it. None of it looks like much on the day you do it. All of it is the kingdom coming, the seed growing silently in the dark soil, the foundation being laid one hidden stone at a time beneath a house that will stand when the storm finally comes. Do not despise the small beginning. Do not wait for the grand gesture, the total transformation, the day you finally have it all together. That day is not coming, and it was never the point. The small brick laid today is the whole of it. It is the only kind of beginning there has ever been, And fourth, holding all the rest together. It is not a project you complete, but a relationship you inhabit. He did not say, master my teachings. He did not say, memorize my 100 sayings and check them off one by one. He said, follow me, abide in me, come to me. The goal was never, not for one moment, to turn you into a person who has finally, exhaustingly checked off all 100 things and can now rest on the achievement. The goal was to draw you into a living, daily, breathing relationship with the one who spoke them, close enough to him, abiding in him, dwelling near his heart, that his words gradually stop being external rules imposed from outside and start becoming your own instincts, the natural and almost effortless expression of a heart that has spent enough time near his heart to be quietly, permanently reshaped by it. That is exactly what happened to the loud, brash, impulsive fisherman who became the rock. That is exactly what happened to the sons of thunder who wanted to call down fire and became apostles of love. That is what happens without exception to anyone who stays close enough to him for long enough. You do not become like Jesus by studying him from a safe distance and trying grimly to copy his behavior. You become like him by abiding near him day after ordinary day, until his character quietly seeps into yours, the way the character of a person you live with for decades seeps into your own. The whole thing is, and always was, a relationship. Not a curriculum, not a checklist. A relationship offered freely, waiting for you to enter it. He said these 100 things for a reason. And now, at the end of our long walk through them, I hope the reason stands clear and shining and unmistakable before you. Every word was aimed at your freedom. Every command was a door held open. Every promise was a hand extended toward you across 2,000 years of history, reaching for yours. Every claim about himself was an offer of something solid enough to hold your entire weight when everything else gives way. He did not speak to burden you. He spoke to unburden you. He did not speak to measure you and find you wanting and send you away ashamed. He spoke to find you and to heal you and to bring you all the way home. The tragedy was never that his words were too hard for people like us. The tragedy was only that we admired them from the safety of the shore and would not get into the boat. And the good news, the news that changes everything, the news worth building a whole life on, is that the boat is still there, tied up and waiting, and the water is still calm enough, and the one who first said, "Follow me," is still standing on the far shore, still saying it, still waiting, with a patience that has not worn thin in 20 centuries, for you specifically, for you today. So do not walk away from this teaching having only heard it. That would be to build one more time on sand. Do the one thing you already know he has put his finger on. Turn the single turn you have been avoiding. Receive the love you have been holding at arm's length for so long. Lay the one brick. Take the one step off the shore and into the boat. You do not have to do all 100 things tonight. You never did. You have to do the next thing, the one small, real, actual, ordinary thing. And then tomorrow the next, and the day after that the next, and that, exactly that, is how a whole life gets built at last, brick by brick and turn by turn, upon the rock that does not move when the floods come. We have come a very long way together, you and I, and before I speak a final blessing over you, I want to ask you to do one thing, and only one thing, with everything you have received here today. If any part of this teaching found you, if even one of these 100 things landed in the exact place where you needed it most, then take this video and send it to one person. You already know who they are. Their face came to mind somewhere in the last few hours, the friend drowning quietly in worry, the family member locked for years in a grievance they cannot seem to put down, the person you love who is building without even knowing it, on sand. Send it to them. Not with a lecture, not with a sermon, not with a heavy word attached. Just send it simply with a note that says, "I thought of you while I was listening to this." That is all. A single share is a quiet and genuinely powerful act of love toward one soul. And you may never know this side of eternity, what door it opens in them, what weight it lifts, what turning it begins. And if this teaching gave you something worth coming back to, then subscribe before you go, so the next one can find you when it comes. It costs nothing at all. It is a single tap of your thumb, and it simply keeps your seat here at the table for whatever comes next. And then, before you close this and step back into your life, leave a comment and tell me, which line, which verse, which one of these 100 words did you most need to hear today? Say it plainly and honestly, so that weeks from now, when some other weary soul scrolls past your comment in the middle of their own hard night, your words become the very thing they needed to hear too. And now, the blessing, spoken over you and no one else, right where you are at this exact hour, in whatever weight you carried into this moment. May the God who said, "Do not worry," lift the crushing weight of tomorrow off of your shoulders tonight and teach your heart, gently and patiently, to trust the Father who feeds the birds of the air and clothes the lilies of the field, and has never once, not for a single day of your life, forgotten your name. May the one who said, "Come to me, and I will give you rest," draw you out from under the grinding yoke of doing it all alone, and give you the rest that reaches all the way down to the place beneath the place where sleep can go. May the words of Jesus stop being heirlooms you admire behind glass and become instead the very foundation beneath your feet, so that when the rains fall and the floods rise and the winds beat against your house, and they will, for they come to every house, you will stand, because you did not only hear but built. May you turn at last, the one turn you have been avoiding for so long. May you receive at last the love you have been holding at arm's length. And may you walk out of this hour, not as one who heard 100 beautiful things and quietly set them all back down on the shelf, but as one who took the next real step off the shore and into the boat and found, waiting there, the one who had been standing just off the water all along, calling your name. He is still speaking. He always was. And the words that changed eternity are still tonight, in this very moment, ready and able to change you. Go now in peace. You are loved beyond all your understanding, and you always were, and you always will be. Amen.